For decades, the U.S. Corn Belt, spanning states like Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Nebraska, and Minnesota, was regarded as one of the most predictable and stable agricultural regions on Earth. It was a territory defined by fertile soils, steady yields, reliable climate patterns, and a robust logistics network that ensured some of the world's most consistent corn and soybean outputs. For governments, traders, food processors, and international buyers, the Corn Belt symbolized certainty. If there was one place where the harvest would not fail, it was here. This perception shaped policies, economic models, transport networks, and global food flows for more than half a century. But over the last several years, this agricultural fortress has begun to show new vulnerabilities, not because of internal weakness, but because the system surrounding it has transformed. The Corn Belt, once the anchor of global stability, is now deeply entangled with forces far beyond its control. One of the most significant sources of this new fragility comes from global fertilizer supply chains. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the basic building blocks of modern agriculture, now depend on an international market that is highly concentrated and exposed to geopolitical shocks. Major producers like Russia, Belarus, and China play outsized roles in global availability and pricing. This means that a conflict in Eastern Europe, an export restriction in Asia, or a spike in natural gas prices can dramatically raise production costs for a farmer in Iowa or Illinois, even when local conditions are ideal. The Corn Belt is now only as stable as the geopolitics governing its inputs. At the same time, the region has become more dependent than ever on foreign markets. China, Mexico, Japan, and other top buyers represent a massive share of U.S. corn and soybean demand. This dependence turns diplomatic tensions, tariff disputes, or sanitary restrictions into direct threats to farm incomes. A decision by Beijing to shift purchases toward Brazil, or a political dispute that pauses shipments, can reverberate instantly through local markets. Farmers who once relied primarily on domestic buyers now operate in an environment where international rivalries and trade negotiations determine their profitability. Infrastructure is another point of mounting vulnerability. Although the Corn Belt boasts one of the world's most advanced agricultural transport systems, much of it is aging. The Mississippi River, responsible for moving nearly half of all U.S. grain exports, now faces deteriorating locks, inconsistent river depths, and historic droughts that have repeatedly choked barge traffic. Rail networks are congested, rural roads are deteriorating, and storage systems strain during peak harvest. In a global system where every hour of transport influences price and competitiveness, this structural fragility carries real consequences. On top of this, the Corn Belt is now tied to global energy markets in ways that were unimaginable a generation ago. Corn-derived ethanol links the region directly to oil cycles, OPEC decisions, renewable fuel standards, and carbon credit markets. Volatility in these sectors directly influences agricultural prices, making the system more sensitive than ever to external economic turbulence. The fertilizer system that once fueled the U.S. grain belt with predictable prices is now shaped by geopolitics. Russia and Belarus dominate potash exports. China is a critical supplier of phosphates. Middle Eastern countries influence nitrogen through natural gas. When Moscow faces sanctions, when Beijing restricts exports, or when the Middle East adjusts production to leverage diplomatic influence, American producers feel the shock instantly. Fertilizer isn't just an input anymore, it's a geopolitical weapon, and Midwest farmers are caught in the middle of decisions made continents away. Modern agriculture runs on energy. Diesel powers planting, harvesting, and transportation. Natural gas fuels nitrogen production and grain drying, essential in the Corn Belt's climate. Global conflicts, OPEC decisions, refinery disruptions, or maritime choke points like the Red Sea all raise energy volatility. Every spike in diesel or gas reshapes farm budgets, squeezes margins, and increases the cost of simply finishing a crop. The Corn Belt's economics are now tied to global energy markets, not local fuel prices. What once made American agriculture resilient was geographic diversification. Bad weather in one region could be offset by strong yields in another. But the new climate reality delivers simultaneous shocks across multiple global producers. Droughts in Argentina, floods in China, heat waves in Europe, or windstorms in the Midwest. These overlapping events tighten global supplies, increase price volatility, and magnify risk. Even if conditions in Iowa are stable, turmoil elsewhere forces unpredictable market swings that land directly on U.S. producers. Brazil and Argentina are no longer emerging competitors, they are powerhouse exporters reshaping global agricultural dynamics. Brazil expands planted area every year, opens new export corridors, and modernizes ports at a pace the U.S. struggles to match. Argentina, even amid economic turmoil, boosts soybean processing capacity and aggressively targets global markets. Their lower production costs and expanding infrastructure reduce U.S. market share, compress margins, and force American farmers to compete under tighter global pricing. Producers in the Corn Belt have always navigated price swings, but the new era of global volatility is different. Fertilizer shocks, energy spikes, and climate-driven yield uncertainties compress margins from multiple directions at once. Costs rise faster than revenue can adjust, and insurance programs only partially cushion the impact. Even efficient operations face tighter profitability windows. This new environment makes long-term planning harder, adds financial stress, and accelerates consolidation as smaller producers struggle to survive sustained turbulence. The U.S. agriculture system depends heavily on export markets, especially China, Mexico, Japan, and Southeast Asia. But as global competition intensifies and geopolitical tensions rise, these buyers gain leverage. A diplomatic dispute, a tariff shift, or a strategic pivot towards South America can instantly disrupt U.S. demand. For the Corn Belt, this means that economic health is increasingly tied to political decisions made abroad. Producers become more exposed to trade wars, retaliatory measures, and shifts in long-term procurement strategies. Aging infrastructure in key agricultural corridors magnifies vulnerability. The Mississippi River, responsible for transporting more than half of U.S. grain exports, faces declining water levels, aging locks, and climate-induced disruptions. Rail networks operate near capacity, vulnerable to labor disputes and logistical bottlenecks. Storage systems in some regions are outdated, increasing losses during extreme weather. As global markets demand faster, cheaper, more efficient supply chains, these structural weaknesses become strategic liabilities for the entire Corn Belt. As margins shrink and volatility rises, rural communities face profound consequences. When producers reduce investment or leave farming, local equipment dealers, grain elevators, input suppliers, and service providers feel immediate strain. Schools, hospitals, and small businesses lose funding as tax bases weaken. The long-term effect is a deepening economic divide. Prosperous regions tied to large corporate operations contrast sharply with struggling towns dependent on independent producers. In some areas, depopulation accelerates as young people leave in search of stability elsewhere. Perhaps the most significant consequence is the strategic one. The U.S. Corn Belt is no longer just an agricultural powerhouse, it is a pillar of national stability. When fertilizer depends on geopolitical rivals, when exports rely on friction-prone relationships, when energy markets shape production costs, and when global competitors rewrite supply chains, the U.S. loses degrees of control over its food system. A shock in one region of the world can disrupt planting intentions in Iowa or harvest logistics in Illinois. Food security and national security become inseparable, and vulnerabilities once considered market issues now carry geopolitical weight.